Hello everybody, in today's video we're going to be going over some colder temperatures in the eastern two-thirds of the country for the next few days. This is going to be starting a colder trend as we move into early November, so we'll actually start to get a little bit of snowfall even in the lower elevations of the central plains and also into the east as well, so that's going to be fun. I'll definitely be tracking those events when they do happen, and whenever we do get some lower elevation snowfall, I'll definitely have my snowfall forecasts out for that. Again, we're going to mainly be focusing on the temperatures, but we will also talk about where snow is possible over the next 10 or so days, and it's actually going to be possible over a good portion of the country, so it's not just for some areas of the Rockies or some parts of the upper Great Lakes. It will actually be for a fairly wide area, and again, that's where it's possible, not necessarily where it's going to happen. So again, a lot of things can still change. We're going to be going over that and much more in today's video, so make sure you are staying tuned all the way until the end. So let's get right into it, and let's start off with your current National Weather Service page. As you can see, we have some wind advisories, high wind warnings, and high wind watches in effect for some parts of Montana, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Colorado, Nebraska, Wyoming, South Dakota, North Dakota, and Minnesota, as well as for some parts of North Carolina, Virginia, West Virginia, Maryland, D.C., Rhode Island, Connecticut, and Massachusetts, where we have those wind advisories or wind warnings in place. So definitely a very windy day in general for much of the country. We have some frost advisories up for parts of Indiana, Kentucky, Ohio, and southern Michigan, as well as some winter weather advisories in parts of Colorado, Montana, and Idaho. Actually, I think that's just for Montana. I don't think it crosses over into Idaho. We have some red flag warnings scattered throughout parts of Texas, Colorado, and Kansas. And then we have flood watches and flash flood warnings and all of that posted up for parts of Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and some parts of southeastern New England in general. So yesterday we had a high temperature of 99 in Zavada, Texas, and Rio Grande Village, Texas. The the low temperature was 18 degrees, 2 miles south of Brimson, Minnesota. The highest rainfall report was in Lucia, California, where they got 11.51 inches of rain, and the high snowfall report was 25 inches, 7 miles west of Truckee, California, which, by the way, it's a very beautiful part of the country when you go up into the Sierra Nevada mountains, especially if you drive through some of those mountain passes. I definitely want to do that one day, just from some of the pictures I've seen. Very great area, and I really want to do that, especially in the fall or maybe even in the winter. I'll see if that is a possibility, but that would definitely be a fun thing. I want to experience one of those massive 4 feet snowstorms. That's definitely something that's on my bucket list. So that's definitely something that some of these areas are experiencing. We already had some reports up to 3 or 4 feet in those areas. So definitely some very heavy snowfall that has fallen over the past few hours in those spots. Now, talking about snowfall, here's the next 10 days on the European. Now, not all of this is actually going to fall. This is just what the European model is showing, but there are some good signs if you do like snow and cold. One thing is that we're now starting to see this snow expand a little bit further to the east, and you're actually starting to see the first signs of snow in the eastern half of the country. So it is going to be fairly far to the north, but you are still seeing those early signs. Now, I'm not expecting most of this to actually occur. Some of it may occur. A lot of this will actually be in the form of lake effect snowfall, so that is definitely possible, especially on some of those colder nights. But I'm not going to go and proclaim that this is 100% true, because it definitely is not. This is going to be something that we're going to have to continue to track, and once it gets within 3 or 4 days, that's when we can get more of a good good look at it. So don't look at any of the numbers, don't look at any of the details, but there are a few things that you want to pay attention to. One is that for the first time in a while, we've seen the models actually bring that snowfall line down below the border in the eastern United States. You can also see that much of Canada is getting filled up with snow, which means that if it's starting to snow up in Canada, we're only a couple weeks removed from that happening in the United States as well. So eventually that snow is going to pour down across the southern part of the border, which means that parts of the U.S. will eventually get in on some of that snowfall. The West is also starting to get snowier, so we already have all that snow out in California and Oregon for the past couple of days. And that's going to be spreading into the Rockies and the Central Plains as we get into later this week and into next week. So we're already starting to see quite a few good signs in terms of snow and cold. Now here's a look at the low temperatures. We're just going to play this through the next 7 days, and then we're going to look at the upper air map. Now you can see that we have that little nor'easter system which is over the northeast right now. So you have a little pocket of warmer air, but right behind it you have very cold temperatures into parts of the Great Lakes and the Ohio Valley. So that's why we have all those frost advisories up for Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, Michigan. So that's why we have those up, because you will drop down into the 30s by tomorrow morning. We also have really cold temperatures for the West, so you'll get down into the 30s and even some 20s. If we move this on to Thursday, the 28th, you can see that not a lot has changed. It does warm up if you live in the Ohio Valley, but it cools down if you live in the Northeast. The Rockies pretty much exactly the same with the temperatures, but we do start to see a little bit more of a troughing pattern develop. So we have a trough in the west, which is why we have these colder temperatures. We also have another little trough in the east. So here's generally what your jet stream looks like right now. We have a little bit of warming up through the central column of the country. We have colder air for the northeast, and then we have cold air for the Rockies. So this entire train of colder and warmer temperatures is going to slide to the east. So in a couple of days, you'll see that the colder temperatures are right here. You have ridging maybe on both sides, and then you'll have troughing in the middle. And then we'll eventually see the next pattern where you have colder temperatures in the northwest, and then it moves into the northeast and the mid-Atlantic with the colder temperatures. So we're going to continue to see this little shift in the troughs. We're probably, for most times, over the next 3 weeks, going to have at least 2 troughs in the country at any one time, and that'll mean that we're in a predominantly cold pattern with a couple of spells of warmer temperatures in between. Now let's move this on to Friday, October 29th. You can see that we have some colder temperatures still up for the northern plains and the Rockies. It's cold in New England as well. This would be by Saturday. Here's Sunday, and this is when you start to see our next real push of cold air. So we have temperatures that are going to drop into the 20s as you get further to the north, the 30s as you get further to the south, and this entire line of colder temperatures will march on further to the east. So here to be by November 1st, which is Monday, and you can see that we have those colder temperatures continuing to spread further east. Now, I'm not going to play this out. If you were to play it out, this model run does show a rather cold blast of air into the east, but I don't want to go that far out. I really like to limit myself to 7 days out, because once you get past 10 days out, even on temperature maps, it does start to get a little bit uncertain. So, if you were to play this model out, you would see this little line of cold air move to the south and to the east, but I don't want to do that just yet, because that would be a little bit unresponsible or irresponsible, just because it's not 100% guaranteed that that will happen, and things will probably still change quite a bit from the time that I'm making this video to the time that we reach November 1st on Monday, when this map would be valid for. So I just want to kind of keep it within the next 7 days, because that's when we have the most certainty. Now let's take a look at the upper air maps, because these are going to give us a good idea of what's actually happening. Now we have this trough in the central United States. So this is the system that was over California, and that just a few hours ago was delivering quite a bit of heavy rain and snow to much of California and Oregon. And now that's all moved further to the east. So now this is in the central United States. We have a little bit of troughing into the east. So what we have is this nor'easter system bringing in northwesterly winds on the back end. So even though it is popping up as that orange color for a lot of spots, that does not mean it's going to be warmer. It will be warmer in the central plains because you have a little bit of ridging up there. But once you get into parts of the northeast, you'll have a brisk northwesterly flow. Actually, in some parts, it'll be coming out of the northeast or straight north, and that's going to provide some colder temperatures. So it will feel quite considerably colder as we get to tomorrow evening, and then maybe even into Thursday. Now, if you move this on to Saturday, here's what happens. We have your ridging into the west and the central United States, and then we have a big trough into the east. So we have this low pressure system right here, which is delivering in more colder shots of air. It's at this time that you really want to pay attention to what's happening up in Canada as well, because that will merge with this Pacific storm, and both of them will kind of merge up somewhere in the northern plains or in the northwest, and that's how that cold air mass is really going to dip down into the United States. So here's what happens. You can see that by Monday, which is November 1st, you can see that we have that trough into the northern plains. So here's what it looks like when you were to, or if you were to kind of draw that out. So it's an east to west type of setup. With this trough, it's originating up in James Bay in Canada, so it's originating all the way up here, but it's ending up all the way down into the northern plains. So that's a fairly cold source of air that you have, and so that's why it will be into the 20s over some of these spots. It will be warmer once you get further to the south, so pretty much anywhere south of that area will be dealing with warmer temperatures, but once you get north of that boundary zone, you will have some considerably colder temperatures. This would be by November 1st. Here's November 3rd, and you can see that we have some colder air into much of the east, and it is definitely much colder by this point. So it is going to be definitely a chilly day as we get into next week. So I would say next week in general is going to be quite chilly for most spots in the east. You'll at least have 2 or 3 days that are considerably colder, where you get down into the 40s or the 30s, and depending on your location, maybe even down into the 20s. If we move this on to Thursday, the system that was originally down in the southwest and in the Four Corners has now moved on to Texas and Oklahoma. We have that trough still into the eastern third of the country, so right along the east coast. So it is definitely a fast-moving pattern. We're not going to be dealing with anything that's going to be set in stone, but you're going to definitely see, I would say, maybe a 2-to-1 ratio of cold to warm air as we move into November. So that means that maybe 10 of the 30 days in November will be colder or will be warmer, but you're probably going to have 20 or so of those days that are going to be on the colder side. So it's not to say that you're not going to have a few days where maybe you reach up into the 60s and 70s. It's just saying that the majority of those days you'll probably be stuck in some of those colder temperatures, and I think winter is definitely going to start to arrive. And in a lot of spots, even if it is just near normal, which by this time of year is actually fairly cold, even if it is near normal for a lot of spots, it's going to feel a lot colder than what it actually is, because for much of the month of October, we've been in a very mild pattern for the east. So any sort of temperature that is even close to normal, even if it is actually maybe a couple of degrees above normal, may feel chilly. Even the 40s or 50s this time of year may feel chilly to most folks, even though in past years you would probably take a 40 or 50 degree day because the other days were in the 30s. So it's been a very, very mild October. So that's only going to add to the more extreme effect that you're really going to feel that colder air when it comes in, because you're going to be pretty used to those nice, mild, and warm temperatures, which unfortunately aren't going to stay for too long. Now, as we move this on to the last day of this model run, which is November 5th, you can see that we have that trough into the central United States. Now, again, this is a hypothetical, so we don't know exactly where this trough is going to set up, but the general scope of things, if you were to look at any model over the next 2 weeks, it would show you that you have a general consensus of some troughing into the east and some organized in some fashion, some ridging into the west, or at least some push of warmer air compared to normal in the west. So that is the type of pattern that is setting up, and it would definitely favor a colder and snowier setup. Now, if you look at some of these oscillations, this is the NAO, which is the North Atlantic oscillation. This covers the area south of Greenland, and you really want this to either be near normal or going negative for if you live in the eastern United States. That's typically when you have the coldest temperatures, and that also lines up with some of the snowiest weeks and months, is when you have colder temperatures in the east, which usually originates from a negative NAO. So you can see that for the next week or so, we're going to actually hover around the neutral line. So maybe even a couple, maybe a standard deviation or two above the mean. But you start to get past, I would say, the 6th or the 7th, and something just shifts where we see this completely go down. And you're going to see this correlation among several different oscillations. And if you were to look at any other forecasting model, in this case we're looking at the GFS, but that's only because it goes out 15 days compared to the European, which only goes out 10 days. But if you were to look at any other model, including the European, you would see that around this date we would start to see at least the signs of something going down, where we would see these trends start to go a little bit further negative and negative. So by the end of this model run, we end up maybe 3 standard deviations below the mean, even though just maybe 7 days before that, we would have been maybe 1 standard deviation above the mean. So that's a fairly big drop in just a short amount of time. If we look at the AO as well, the Arctic oscillations, this is also going to be close to 3 standard deviations below the mean. You're looking at this diving down really towards the end of this model run around, I'd say, the 10th, or probably actually closer to the 8th or 9th when this starts to go down. So that correlates almost perfectly with the NAO. When the AO, the Arctic oscillation, is in the negative phase, that typically means that you have a little bit more movement in the polar vortex area, or with the polar vortex in the Arctic Circle. And what that means is that you can see some of that colder air, instead of being bottled up in the Arctic Circle, some of that actually starts to move down either into Europe and Asia, or it moves into North America. So in this case, you would want this to be negative, because it would mean that you have more opportunity for some polar air to make its way all the way into the United States and Canada. And that's, of course, if you like cold and snow. If you don't, and you live in the eastern United States, you would want to see this pretty much in the opposite direction. You would want to see this as high as possible, because that would mean you're in nice mild temperatures. But unfortunately for you, it does not look like that's going to be the case. And if we look at the PNA, I think one of the strongest oscillations and one of the most important to look at is the PNA, the Pacific North America Index. And you can see that we have this currently right at neutral, so it's right at the neutral line, but this is going to be moving fairly positive. We're going to be going pretty much at least 1 standard deviation above the mean for most of the model run, which with a few exceptions. And what happens when the PNA is positive, this covers the entire western third of North America, as well as some of the eastern Pacific, and basically when this is positive, usually that indicates ridging over those areas. And if it's a ridging in the west, or if it's warmer in the west, typically you're going to have the complete opposite in the east. So usually east of the Rockies, in these type of patterns, you would have some semblance of colder air, or some amount of colder air into those areas. So this is all correlating with each other. You can see the NAO going down, the AO going down, the PNA going going up, and even if you look at the EPO, that is actually starting to go down as well. So everything is going fairly perfect if you want a colder setup, and it's happening at the exact right time. If you were to ask anybody who likes cold and snow, including myself, whether you would want to have this, if you would trade a very mild October for a colder and snowier November and maybe December, I would definitely take that as a person who likes cold and snow. And I'm pretty sure that a lot of people would agree with me who are in that same position, because once you get into November, there's a fairly high chance that you're going to get snow anyway. Once you're in October, there's only a handful of days at the end of the month where most areas are actually going to have a chance at seeing snowfall. But for most of that month, even if you are 15 degrees below normal, really it's not even that chilly. But once you get into November, it does start to feel a lot more like winter, and so being colder in November is definitely a lot worse in terms of the actual temperatures than being colder in October. So just one thing that you want to factor in is also, again, the time of year. We are changing into a much colder time of year. So you're going to see that your average temperature, your average high temperature from October 1st to November 1st is much different, probably by 20 degrees. It is interesting how much that does change within 1 month. So that is going to wrap it up for today's video. I'm thinking that I'll probably make a couple more videos on this pattern over the next few days, and maybe even a few more on the Enzo. I'm not sure if I'll make too many on the Enzo pattern, just because we're pretty much already into the winter, so talking about the Enzo is kind of a moot point because you can already start to look at the shorter range to forecast. But still, I might look at that and just make a couple forecasts on those type of videos. It seems like you guys do enjoy those, and if you have any questions or comments, just leave them down below. I'll try and respond as quick as possible, but of course with school and everything, it is hard to be as quick as I was, especially in the summer, because I just didn't have any schoolwork, or not that much schoolwork to actually do. So of course I was able to answer comments pretty much within a couple hours, but I still do try to answer them as much as possible. I try to go through a few at a time so that I can get through all of them by the end of the day. So again, if you have any questions or comments, there's pretty much a guarantee that within 24 hours I'll respond to you, and any suggestions for video ideas, or if you have any weather photos that you want to send in, just send that over to my email address, which is in the description down below. So again, that is going to wrap it up, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Goodbye.